I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Crown High School Community Work Session number 1. It's October 28th, 2021. I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight. We have an overview and a great presentation for you by our architect Stantec. We're going to go right ahead and jump into some items here to prepare for the meeting, and they can start the presentation.
Shall we begin now, Rob?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Rob, and good evening to everyone. On behalf of Montgomery County Public Schools, my colleagues at Stantec Architecture, and all the members of the design and construction team, we're very excited to be with you tonight to begin our work together on the new Crown High School. So thank you for taking the time to join this call, for being a part of this public process, and for your willingness to share your ideas with all of us so that together we can make this project the best that it can be. As you probably already know, the planning and design process for school projects in Montgomery County relies heavily on the voice of the community, so that your ideas and your insights might inform the decisions about this project that will ultimately be made by the Board of Education. Our job together is to develop for the Board of Education a concept for the school building and site that addresses as many of the concerns and aspirations of this community as possible. Together, through the design of this new high school, we've all been granted a tremendous opportunity to contribute in a significant way to advancing the mission and vision of Montgomery County Public Schools and the city of Gaithersburg as well. So we hope that all of you are as excited as all of us to get the conversation started. Jasmine, would you please? We'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the virtual format for our meeting. This format was chosen to allow as many individuals to participate as possible in a manner that is most convenient for you. So whether it's from your computer or from your phone, from your work or from your home, even if you're away on business or vacation, this format creates the opportunity for you to participate. So again, thank you for doing so. The invitation for tonight's meeting included a request to advise Montgomery County Public Schools if any special considerations were needed in the event of hearing impairment or other form of language barrier. No such requests were received for tonight's meeting. And as we go forward, please know that MCPS and our team have the ability to accommodate those requirements. To begin, please know that our meeting is being recorded, as are all community work sessions for Montgomery County Public Schools. We'd also like to mention a couple of features that should help our meeting go smoothly this evening. First, if you hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen on your device, you should notice that a black bar appears. And in the middle of that bar, you'll see 3 menu icons: chat, raise hand, and question and answer. Would you please take a moment to try this now on your device? You'll notice that the black bar only remains visible for a few seconds and then it disappears. But you can bring it back again by hovering your cursor over the bottom of your screen. Hopefully everyone is able to do that. For the purposes of tonight's meeting, we won't be using the chat or the raise hand functions. Only the question and answer icon is needed tonight. At any time throughout the meeting, please use the question and answer tab to ask your question by typing it in the box that will appear on your screen. Your question will only be seen by the host and the designated panelists, and we'll introduce those in just a moment. Rob will monitor the questions and answers that are submitted throughout the meeting, and we'll leave time at the end of the meeting to address as many of them as possible. All questions that are not answered during the course of this meeting will be answered in writing, and the responses will be posted to the MCPS project website, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So we would very much like to know who's on the call this evening. And to do that, we have a poll that requests your affiliation. In a moment, we'll launch the poll and you'll see an image such as the one that's on the screen to the right. And we ask that you check as many of the boxes that may apply to you and submit those. Because some participants in tonight's meeting may join later, we're also going to run this same poll toward the end of our meeting. But please only answer it once. So if you answer it now and leave before the meeting ends, we'll know that you were here. And if you come late and you stay to the end, we'll also know that you were here. So Jasmine, would you please launch poll number 1? And again, we ask that all participants take a moment to complete the poll and then hit the submit button. Jasmine, if you would. Looks like it's slowing down there, Jasmine.
Okay, and maybe another 10 seconds, we'll close it off.
Well, thank you, Jasmine. Next slide, please. Jasmine, would you mind? There you go. Thank you. You may be interested to know that over 3,600 invitations were sent out by Montgomery County Public Schools, including residents of 14 homeowner associations in the city of Gaithersburg, surrounding residential and commercial property owners, as well as the families of the surrounding 5 high school clusters. So again, thank you for being one of the people who answered the invitation and are on the call this evening. And then Jasmine, if you would go to the next slide, please. Finally, just one last word about our work together. In our experience, community processes are most productive and most collaborative, most fun even really, when we all keep in mind a shared sense of purpose and do our best to recognize and honor the opportunity before us. So along the way, we'll be asked to share our ideas and accept and support someone else's ideas as well. The public process helps us all to be more informed, to learn something that we wouldn't otherwise know, that again helps to inform our own understanding. By working together, we can better tackle the complex challenges that we're sure to face and offer proposed solutions. Ultimately, after we come up with something that's really worthy, we can then offer our recommendations to the Board of Education. Regardless of the outcome, I think we can all take pride in the fact that our work together directly supports quality public education in Montgomery County, and that contribution occurs through the thoughtful and collaborative design of the new Crown High School. DJ, did you want to make a point about the boundary study at this time?
Sure. I just want to remind everybody that this is our first community engagement. This is a design and construction meeting. We will have the boundary study community outreach 12 to 18 months prior to the completion date, which right now is scheduled for August of 2026. So if you could hold your boundary study questions, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, DJ. Jasmine, next slide, please. Our agenda for this evening's discussion is meant to introduce and provide sufficient background about the many considerations that form the basis of this project. all of which must then be addressed by the design of the new school. So we'll begin with an overview of the community work session process. We'll then pause to introduce the representatives from MCPS and the design and construction team, who are also panelists on tonight's call. We'll then share with you the preliminary educational specification, which is a document prepared by MCPS that addresses both the quantitative and the qualitative requirements of the project. We'll then pivot the presentation to the Crown High School project itself, the design of that project, and begin the conversation by looking first at the project site before sharing preliminary design options. From there, we'll move to questions and answers before we adjourn at 8 p.m. Next slide, please, Jasmine. Okay, and again. So we have 4 scheduled work sessions, tonight being the first. It's important, I think, to understand that tonight follows a meeting that was held with the City of Gaithersburg, Mayor and City Council earlier this month. But our work together occurs in the schematic design phase of this project, and Matt Wagasback will talk about that in just a moment. We have 4 sessions, an hour and a half each. And at the end of this, we should come out of this with a concept for both the building and the site to present to the school board in early February. That's our task. It's a great deal of work. And so we will be focused and prepared to lead these discussions at each of the 3 meetings that follow, and tonight as well. Next slide, please, Jasmine. The Crown High School site is hosted, has its own website that is hosted on the MCPS website itself. You can see the link there at the bottom of this page. But all of the presentations that will be made publicly as part of the work session process, and any project presentation that's made to the Board of Education will also be posted to this project website. All of the questions and answers that we mentioned earlier will also be posted to this website. And Rob, is there anything that I've overlooked here that we might want to mention while this slide is up?
Oh, I think we covered everything. We're the Q&As, the questions that we do not get to will be, the answers will be posted.
Okay, thank you. And I think within 48 hours of the presentation itself, tonight's slide deck will be posted to this website. Jasmine has just shared with everyone a link to the website. You probably already have it, but if not, it is now in the chat, and you can link to it there. Thank you, Jasmine, for doing that. Next slide, please. Okay, at this time, DJ.
Sure. I'd like to introduce the MCPS design team on this project. With us tonight, we have the Director of Facilities Management, who would be Seth Adams. We have Adrian Kiramijas, who is our Director of Capital Planning and Real Estate. My name is DJ Conley. I'm one of the senior planners within the division. With us from the Division of Design and Construction, we have Gary Mosesman, our Director, Seth Fariano, who is our team leader with business and operations, our facilities manager, Dennis Cross, and our program manager, Robbie Babstedner. With us from the curriculum, Scott Murphy wasn't able to make it this evening, but has been heavily involved throughout the design process. But with us tonight, we do have Genevieve Floyd, who is one of our supervisors with career and post-secondary partnerships. So throughout this design process, we have been meeting with our central office folks, but also some MCPS school-based folks as well, who consist of principals, assistant principals, school business administrators. We had a few teachers, specialists, and all of our school-based staff. They had different various educational backgrounds.
Thank you, DJ. These are the members of the Stantec Architecture team. My name is Dirk Jeffrey, Senior Principal with Stantec Architecture. I'm joined by Matt Wagesback, our Senior Project Manager, Jasmine McDuffie, our Senior Project Architect, Wilfredo Rodriguez, our Senior Project Designer, and Heidi Liu, our Project Designer. All of us are on the call tonight except for Heidi, who unfortunately had a conflict. And you will hear from each of the other teammates here in just a moment. Next slide, please. The design team is also comprised of several other engineering and specialty design consultants. We have civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and fire protection engineers. We also have acoustics and IT consultants. We have food service consultants. We have cost consultants. We have sustainable design consultants as well. These are all people with whom we have worked before on school projects, and all people that have worked in Montgomery County as well. Next slide, please. We're also pleased to say that MCPS has already selected the builder for this project. The construction manager is Keller Construction, and we also have Steve and Dave on the call this evening. Next slide, please. DJ.
Yeah, so just to give a little background, these are the 5 high school clusters that have been identified that will impact Crown High School. These are the adjacent high schools, and most of them are overutilized at the current time. Next slide.
So this is the overall project schedule that ties into the community engagement schedule that Dirk presented earlier. So we are wrapping up community engagement towards the middle of December, and then we'll produce that schematic design package that'll go out in February of next year. We then move into DDs and CDs, which is where we produce documentation and drawings for this project in order to build this. Those complete in May of 2023, and then we'll go through the permitting process. Construction will start in October 2023, with the school being complete and open in fall of 2026.
Great, thank you, Matt. Okay, educational specifications, DJ.
Sure. So Crown High School will be a comprehensive high school with a rough capacity of 2,200. The school will have a core of 2,700 students, which means the core functions such as the cafeteria, the gymnasium, the library media center. Once the school does expand eventually down the road to 2,700, it'll be able to hold that many students. Right now, we're guessing it's going to be roughly 325,000 gross square feet. And I'll turn it over to Genevieve Floyd, who can give us a little background on the different curriculum opportunities that we have.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Connolly. And good evening, everyone. As shared earlier, I am Genevieve Floyd, Supervisor of Career and Post-Secondary Partnerships within MCPS. And as we contemplated the instructional vision for Crown High School, we landed in a space that really joins secondary education with the economy and the careers of the future. So we looked at the jobs of tomorrow, the labor market projections in the county and around the country, and it leans heavily towards STEM. So in addition to the strong general academic program that we have, that includes arts, the instructional vision will include a career focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, information technologies, and biomedicine, as well as others. Crown is really well positioned, literally, to benefit from our strong partnerships with the businesses in the area, as well as reimagine how we partner with Montgomery College and the universities at Shady Grove based on their proximity to Crown. So the instructional program will build a strong foundation in collaboration with our business and post-secondary stakeholders to really prepare our Crown students for those high demand, high wage, high skilled career fields of the future in this growing economy. We certainly want all of our students to stay in the county, but for those who decide to leave us, we definitely want to ensure that the instructional vision, the instructional program that we have at Crown will enable students to be globally competitive should they decide to leave us. So next slide, please.
So this gives you a sort of a visual of the overall program and school build out. We have our generic standard academic classrooms. We will have different types of labs, whether they're science labs or multi-purpose tech labs. We will have some special ed programs, different support spaces. We have our core functions that I talked about before with our PE department and dining, cafeteria, media center. We will have all the different arts at this comprehensive high school, shared spaces and administrative spaces. Next slide. So those were our interior spaces, and these are some of our comprehensive high school program spaces on the exterior of the building. So we'll have a stadium, a baseball field, a softball field, and we'll have some tennis courts. For our parking, we have approximately, we're thinking 400 to 450 cars that we can accommodate, and approximately 35 to 40 buses. And throughout this process, once we start defining boundaries way down the line, we will have a better sense of the exact amount of buses that will be required.
Thank you, DJ and Genevieve. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to the quantitative aspects of the educational specification, there's also a number of qualitative requirements as well. And shown here are just a few of the many concerns that influence the design of schools of all types today, not just new high schools. And these concerns are so important, and they tend to be such high priorities that you might even think of them as tenets of school design. They really are that important. We won't have time this evening to get into the details of each of these, but we did want to share them with you as general concerns that will have specific solutions as the design of the new Crown High School progresses. But just touching briefly on these, Jasmine, if you would go to the next one, please. So again, in terms of safety, schools are already very good about keeping their students safe, and they do this through a combination of strategies. As facility designers, our work typically involves designing and integrating systems, promoting a welcoming environment, and avoiding spaces that are difficult to supervise. But listed here are a number of the systems: access control, surveillance, intrusion detection, things of that nature. But also related to that, though, are the things that we can do to make students feel welcome and safe inside the building, a sense of security inside the building, relationships with others. These things are equally important as well. Next slide, please. Community connection really addresses the ways in which the building serves the community after hours. And certainly Montgomery County, like most school districts, their schools are used 24/7 by many different people. So creating safe access to the spaces that are used by community members and making those spaces inviting while also limiting access to other parts of the building, using graphics and signage sometimes to connect the school to the history of its place. These are all the things that may apply to the design of the Crown High School down the road. Next slide, please, Jasmine. Flexibility speaks to the ways in which schools can adapt not only in the moment, but more importantly, over time as learning and programs change. So that as things change, the school can follow in suit without a great deal of renovation. But creating spaces that are collaborative, as you see in the slide, spaces that are inside and outside spaces for learning. But a variety of spaces for a variety of learning styles is the type of thing that Montgomery County Public Schools addresses in their educational specification. And of course, throughout this school, every space will be fully accessible for the physically handicapped and physically impaired. Next slide, please, Jasmine. And then finally, just a word about sustainability. Here we address Montgomery County Public Schools' commitment to designing energy efficient schools following the guidance of the Green Globes rating system for integrating sustainable design strategies. So when the project is complete, we can be confident that we've accomplished as much as possible to reduce the long-term operating cost through energy efficient design. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So here is the time. We're about half an hour in. We thought that we would then launch the second poll. This is for anyone who's on the call who may have arrived late and who did not complete the first poll. Again, this poll, if you miss it the first time, is simply to identify your affiliation. If you're a member of one of the clusters of the 5 high schools, if you're a school-based person, administration or instruction or support or something of that nature, if you're a business or a local resident, a member of another cluster perhaps, please take a moment and complete the poll that is on your screen. Okay. Jasmine, I think we might be there.
Okay, I'll end the poll.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you to all and welcome, and thank you again for being on the call this evening. Next slide, please, Jasmine. Okay, so at this point, we will turn our attention to the Crown High School site itself. And so if you would, Jasmine. And so to begin any project, we need to understand the site, the place that the project will be built. And so there's a number of criteria that are specific to the Crown High School site, particularly the principles of new urbanism. As you may know, the Crown development embodies the principles of new urbanism in ways that are similar to other developments in Montgomery County. The Kentland's perhaps most famous, but also Lakeland, where Wilfredo Rodriguez lives. But understanding the context, the surrounding proximity, the uses, the land uses around our site, how we access our site, what is its solar orientation, everything that gets introduced onto the site either works with or against the glare and the shadow that will be created by the sun. There's a number of things, as DJ mentioned earlier, that must also be accommodated besides a building on the site. So where do the parking and the play fields and things of that nature, where are they best located? And ultimately, all this must be taken into account, given the fact that we have a great deal of topography. That is a slope of about 40 feet from one end to the other across this site. So that's the criteria. And with that, Wilfredo, may I turn it over to you, please?
Again, good evening, everyone. Like Dirk mentioned, we want to talk a little bit about new urbanism because it's so important to the context. Crown Farm is our context immediate to our new high school site. Is built using new urbanist principles. So we also want to be aware that very close to our site, Kentland is also a new urbanist development, and Lakelands, which where I live. And I think some of those aspects that we want to talk about is sense of place. I think what is very important is starting from urban design, for example, strategic position of how to mix use residential and commercial, how to make nicer and wider bike paths and sidewalks to enhance the walkability and the pedestrian experience. And by doing this, you achieve a higher density. Typically with new urbanism, these are smaller footprints that are combined in very unique ways. And by doing that, you also achieve diversity. And the diversity is not only outdoor spaces, but also in the different typologies of building. You have single family home detached, you have townhomes, row houses, you have condos, and there's also apartments as well. With all of this, you achieve an efficiency that is also sustainable, right? Because typically you have smaller footprints, you have very strategic ways to manage the green areas, and you elevate the quality of the architecture. Typically these spaces pay a lot of attention to detail, to the exterior, also to the interior. You have very specific elements like porticos, balconies, all of these things combined together to create a different quality of architecture, but also by creating these communities that are very easy to walk, you can dine, you can work, you can live in, you elevate the quality of life. Next. So to cite ourselves, this is the Crown Park community. Crown Farm, essentially at the top, you have the Rio where I-270 is. You can see to the top right. That's again, then that's where Rio community, the Rio boardwalk is around there. And to the left, which is to the northwest, is where downtown Crown is, right? Downtown Crown is the first part, is the most dense. That's where most of the mixed use is. A lot of retail with some residential too, mostly condos and apartments. In the middle, you have residential, right? Which is called central, actually east, west, and central Crown. Mostly residential, right? That's where you have the variety of single family, row houses, and multifamily as well. All the way to the end, to the right, this is where the site is. That's what you see in light and this pink color. That's where our site is. So all of this Crown Farm development ends in our site, which makes it a very unique and interesting, right, ending to this whole development. Fields Road and Omega are bounding the site, and actually Morrison within the residential area is bounding the site as well. Next. So more getting closer into the site, this is a view just to talk about the character of downtown Crown. You can see easily how mixed use. The first level is retail, then you have sometimes 4 or 5 stories of residential. You can see a great combination of landscape, wider sidewalks, very inviting, easy to walk around. At the end, you see some of the retail. This is more of a typical row house street. So again, this is a little bit smaller scale, 3 to 4 stories. Again, a lot of attention to the articulation, a little bit more stylized, some traditional, some of them might be a little bit more transitional, but again, the same idea of very easy, smaller, narrower streets, easy to walk and cross with very nice landscape sidewalks. And you can see the variety of the spaces, right? You can find these pockets of places to sit, for the community to gather, to walk or bike. So you see all these variety of smaller to medium-sized pockets like this everywhere in the site. And you can see how also the styles are combined, right? Some of them are more traditional, some of them are more contemporary, but using proportion and articulation and contrast of materials, again, to achieve this variety that is so important of new urbanism.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jasmine, and these images on the screen, the one on the right is Morrison Avenue, which Wilfredo mentioned, which is the street that borders between our site and the residential community. And this image is a great shot of the amount of typography and slope that our site has, and that we'll see a little further in another diagram. And the image on the left is of the end of Crown Park Avenue as it turns and makes its way up Morrison towards Fields Road. And just to kind of cover in more detail the points of access, Wilfredo mentioned I-270. San Ygh Highway is also a major highway nearby, and Crown Park Avenue is a major thoroughfare that stretches between downtown Crown through the residential community and ends at Morrison Street, which borders our site on the west. Fields Road, also a major thoroughfare throughout the community. There's a traffic signal already at the site at the corner of Fields Road, and then this is Washingtonian. And so we're looking at that as a main access point to the site. Omega, as Fields turns this bend, it turns into Omega Drive. And Omega is a street that separates our site from a smaller commercial park, business park. And there's a street cut for an opportunity to create another vehicular access point from Omega onto our site. One of the big features of the residential community are what we're calling a green belt, which is a stormwater management, highly vegetative, really nice looking greenscape. Everything provides an opportunity for site design. And of course, this is our site. In terms of solar orientation, north is straight up and down on the page. Obviously west and east. What we wanted to point out is, as DJ mentioned earlier, there are a number of site programs in addition to our buildings that need to fit on a fairly tight site. The overall acreage is a little over 30 acres and our usable acreage is 25. And so we wanted to identify the optimal solar orientations for the various elements that are going to be populating our site. The building ideally would be oriented, or the majority of it oriented in the east-west direction. Stadiums like to be oriented in the north-south. Baseball and softball ideally are oriented southwest and northeast on the center line of that pitcher's mound. And tennis courts prefer to be oriented in the north-south direction. As I mentioned earlier, it's a fairly steep slope. And in terms of our usable area of our site, the property lines are denoted by the dashed line around the perimeter. However, there's a forest conservation easement on the south end of the site, which occupies approximately 5 acres, leaving us with 25 usable acres left of land. In terms of the colors coding of this diagram, the deeper color on the top represents the highest elevation of the site, and the lighter color represents the lowest elevation. And so from the highest point to the lowest point, as Dirk mentioned, we have about a 40-foot drop in elevation. The slope not only slopes from the north-south, but also slopes down towards the west. This is a 3D model that we have prepared, which starts to show in context of the community in terms of scale of buildings. And so as you can see, the residential communities for the most part are made up of townhomes that are 3 to 4 stories, as Wilfredo mentioned, but there are a few apartment buildings that are a little taller. You see the downtown Crown community in the distance, which has the first floor of retail and the 5 to 6 stories of residential mixed use above. But you also see the height and scale of the surrounding commercial buildings near Omega Drive. And then the lines on this map represent the topography lines, and you can see the amount of slope and steepness on our site. So as we begin to look at the site criteria that we identified, as well as some of the access points that are on the site, looking at, an access point off of Fields Road, looking at, really looking at bringing in that green belt or representing that in some form or fashion, and as well as the access off of Omega Drive, we started to look at the site in terms of quadrants. And so in terms of Zone A, we looked at this being probably the most prominent location of the site, being that it borders off of Fields Road. It's also has the most physical, strong, visible and physical connection to the community, being that it's right off of Morrison Street here. It also has multiple slopes in both north-south direction and east-west. Zone B is the most remote from the community. It also is adjacent to the commercial office park off of Omega, and it has the relatively highest elevation on site. And Zone C, closest to the forest conservation easement, is the flattest part of the site and also the lowest. And so in terms of stormwater management strategies that we've been discussing with our civil engineer, really want to look at capturing, that stormwater management and leading that down to the south of the site. And studying these site planning ideals along with the site criteria, we started to work with Montgomery County's staff and the leadership on this call in leveraging their knowledge of school design past projects to develop options. And we developed and explored a number of different options, both studying the different zones and the site criteria. And we really narrowed it down to these three in terms of really looking at how the site can be laid out. Option 1 and option 2 look at what happens when we put the stadium on the south end of the site. We place parking closer to Omega. And in option 1, really looking at utilizing this green space here next to the community. Option 2, again, keeps the stadium to the south, puts the building a little closer to the community along with the tennis, and puts the fields off of Fields Road with the parking really hugging off of Omega Drive, the corner here. And option 3 studies the option of putting the stadium in the furthest location from the community and placing the building at a location off of Fields and Morrison where it has a closer connection to the community. The next 3 slides shows a large version of these 3 schemes with labels, so you can see the details a little further. So again, option 1, stadium to the south, creating a green zone between the campus, Crown High School campus and the community, placing the parking and service near Omega, and the building really becomes really central to the site. Option 2, again, puts the stadium closer to the south of the site near the forest conservation area, putting the building closer to the community off Morrison, again, creating green space off of Fields and tucking that parking closer to Omega and the business park. And option 3 looks at putting the stadium on the furthest location from the site, closer to Omega, and putting the building more prominently placed near the community and Fields Road, and placing the baseball and softball fields closer to the forest conservation easement. And we really wanted to provide really an overview of these 3 options that we shared with the City of Gaithersburg and mayors a couple of weeks ago, but really look forward to discussing these in more detail during our next future meetings.
Thank you, Jasmine. I just wanted to maybe just piggyback on the comments you just offered about those 3 options, and maybe to suggest that what these concepts really represent are different test fits of how the primary building blocks of a high school site, that is the things that take up land area like the school itself, parking lots and play fields, how those things might lay themselves out on a relatively small site, given the conditions that are true for us here at Crown Park. You may have noticed right away how much of the site area is required for athletics and parking and how much then is left over for the building. So you can see in all of these concepts how compact the building footprints will need to be in order to accommodate all the program that's required. But again, each of these options offers a different way of using the site, offering a different placement of the building, parking, and other site amenities, all that would address established points of access and respond differently to the adjacent community. We hope that just this brief introduction, you have a better sense of the possibilities to do something really unique with this project for Montgomery County Public Schools and the City of Gaithersburg, and that the introduction of these concepts tonight, along with some of the thinking behind their development, as Jasmine mentioned, these were all developed together with MCPS representatives over a number of months. And by the end of that process, we believe that these 3 were good enough to introduce the project to the community and to invite your criticism so that they might be improved over our next 3 meetings together. I alluded to it earlier, but our hope is that with your help, we can use our time together to understand and explore the possibilities of this project on this site. And we'll go into more depth about all of that at our next meeting, as Jasmine mentioned. And so next slide, please. So we are about halfway through our time tonight, but that is all the content that we have prepared to share. We had reserved for our next meeting the in-depth analysis of the three options. We hope that tonight, by sharing the thinking and the background with you and some of the preliminary thinking that led to these design concepts, if you were to download those and think through those, then perhaps at our next meeting, we can then roll up our sleeves and get to work and really address your questions. I see that there are some questions, Rob, and at this point, perhaps we turn it over to you to facilitate the question and answers.
We have a few questions here. So if Jasmine, if you can go back to option 2, there's a question about that option right now. And these are all preliminary. So as we develop the plan, we'll take in your considerations. But the question is, in option 2, is there a service road that connects through Crown Park Avenue? If so, that seems undesirable, concerning for the community. So we don't have one connecting through Park Avenue there, do we?
We do. We have the service drive.
Yeah, it's just a service. So we're looking at different options, and these are the kind of questions that help us best develop the plan with the community comments. And we can explain those as we go through each design, especially in our next meeting on November 11th. We can jump in those details a little deeper. Another question.
Hey, Rob, this is Seth Adams real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I would just say, that has been a theme of discussion around, do we have, or do we limit access to that community to more of just pedestrian bicycle access, or do we look to some level of vehicular access? So very interested in what folks have, what their opinions are regarding that, because certainly if we can do this from a pedestrian and bicycle access only perspective, then I think that's certainly an option that we would want to explore if that's something that's desirable.
Thank you, Seth. So there's another question.
Rob, I
yes.
just wanted to add that there are architectural ways to shield service areas too, as well as to move forward. I know that's part of the question. So just throwing that out there, we can explore ways to make that look nice.
All right, thank you. So there's another question. How many stories would the school building be? So I'm going to turn that over to Dirk, and we haven't quite figured that out yet, but if you could just say a few things about that.
Sure. So the footprints, these slender bars are based on about 110 or 120 foot depth. That accommodates a full-size gymnasium. We can stack classrooms over gymnasiums. We've done that recently. But these very narrow, efficient, compact buildings, again, you can see we don't have room to spread out really, but we're anticipating, Rob, about a 5-story tall building is what we think at this time. And that could certainly be stepped, but maybe 5 stories maximum is what we're thinking.
Yeah, I was just going to say that'll probably be stepped back from the site and property line. All right, thank you. So the next question, on page 32, Sulk Circle was not included as part of the Crown neighborhood. Was that intentional?
No, that was not intentional.
Okay.
That was our misunderstanding about where the limits were. We're sorry about that. We'll fix that.
All right. One says, thank you. As a Crown resident, we support the school building being as close to the development as possible. Thank you for that comment. There is one other question. So in light of the pandemic we're all going through, how will the building design be adjusted to reduce future virus transmissions? Seth Adams, do you want to comment on that one?
And that's a great question, and one that we're certainly going to challenge the design team to think through how to achieve the highest levels of indoor air quality with this particular building. At the same time, balancing and striving for a very sustainable building as well. Typically, when what we've seen is that there seems to be a push-pull with energy reduction and that of increased indoor air quality conditions. We as MCPS are going to move obviously in the direction of increased indoor air quality conditions. So we're going to challenge the design teams to rise to the occasion on the environmental side. So maybe that's something that the design team can come back and talk a little bit more about, maybe bring their mechanical engineers and for us to talk through just what 21st century post-pandemic indoor air quality looks like in high schools.
Absolutely. Thank you. We will do that.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any additional questions there. I see. Okay. No, I thought something new popped up there. We do have Miss Storms here from the state. She was just saying that there wasn't a spot for her to check off in the box. So we'll look at those options maybe in the future and just put an other item there or something. And thank you, Jillian, for joining us tonight. We do have a couple others just came in. Any efforts to make this a net zero energy building? Seth Adams, can you answer that one? Or
Sure. So we will explore it from a net zero perspective. I think there's a lot that comes along with the new approach we're developing for sustainability, particularly in our facilities. So we are looking at some schools that will probably come online before this that we're looking to see how they would fit into a net zero model. But certainly this is a school where we're going to look at it from a perspective of solar generation to obviously water reduction and really maximizing stormwater possibilities. So while I don't think we can commit to a net zero building, I think it's certainly going to have a lot of the attributes that net zero buildings have, and we'll certainly continue to explore that to see if there are design options, concepts that could push us into that net zero range. But yes, solar will be a big part of our portfolio, and I would envision this site and this school utilizing solar to its maximum potential.
thank you. Another question came in. Can we go into more details in the next meetings about the traffic patterns? And yes, we can. We do a traffic study with this initial DD design. So, but we can talk about additional information regarding the traffic and the tie-in between the community and the school. Dennis, did you want to say something? I see it says when to answer this or.
No.
Okay.
No, thank you.
All right. So we have someone said they're also a Crown resident. We prefer the building being furthest away from the homes as possible. We strongly do not want a service road connecting to Crown Park Avenue. Thank you for that comment. And as we go through these different options, we take all that into consideration. Just so you understand, the service road is not, it's used minimally throughout the day for the school. But we'll look at those options as we get further along. But thank you for your comment. So we got another comment here. So there's a question. Let me just read this here. There's a question just to, I hate to bring this up, but with shootings in the schools becoming more and more on the news, do we think should we think about how to keep it contained? Should there be one so that it would be affecting the residential community so much?
So I think too, one of the concepts that we'll explore, and pretty much every one of our school sites, utilizes SEPTED principles, which I know the architects can walk us through, but it's really just thinking about safety from a design, from a amenity location perspective. Obviously our number one goal as a school district is to maximize safety on our school sites, maximize safety for our students. And certainly that translates into, those that are neighboring to our schools as well. So that may also be another opportunity for a future update from the architectural team. And I think as we talk about some of the different options around parking locations, field locations, access locations, some of the safety, security implications of those we'll definitely have to vet through and weigh some of the pros and cons along the way.
All right, thank you, Seth.
Thank
you. Here's a question. There's been a lot of items in the news about design of school buildings being required to be connected to the community, i.e. buildings close to road and parking spaces at the rear of the building. How do you see that principle applying to Crown? Turn it over to Dirk or Jasmine.
Rob, would you repeat the question again?
Yeah, there has been a lot of items in the news about design of schools being required to be connected to community, i.e. buildings close to the road and parking spaces at the rear of the building. How do you see that principle applying to Crown?
Well, I guess there's a couple thoughts that I have on that. Wilfredo mentioned the principles of new urbanism, all of which align very nicely with the design of high school campuses as well. Walkable places, safe places where vehicles are not interfering with the use by students. That said, there's a great deal of parking required for a high school site. And if we can get by with less, we will try, but there are requirements for a lot of cars there. Physically connected buildings is not something that we have seen, but certainly promoting connections, functional connections. I mean, Genevieve talked about the connections with institutions of higher learning. In Falls Church, we completed a recent project that it's almost the opposite of this one, where the high school is first and the development is following. But right across the street from the high school will be mixed use development. And the expectation, as well as Virginia Tech and UVA extension campuses as well are out there. And so they envision students walking across the street to businesses for work-based learning opportunities, as well as taking dual enrollment classes at UVA and Virginia Tech as well. So, but this campus seems like it is absolutely ideal for promoting sort of this integration, I would say, with the surrounding community, because everything is around it. I'm not sure that answers the question, but those are the things that are on my mind at the moment.
Thank you, Dirk. Adrian, here's a question that I think you can answer, and it's about a boundary study, but without getting into boundary analysis study, is there an initial thought about elementary, middle schools that will feed into this high school?
So at this point, the only thing that we can say is that we have identified 5 high school clusters that will that potentially will feed into this new high school. They've been identified because of their overutilization. And those high school clusters are Richard Montgomery, Quince Orchard, Northwest, Gaithersburg, and Wooten. So there is no, until you do a boundary study, there's no way to know who will be reassigned, what students, what areas, what service areas. But those are the 5 high school clusters for now that have been identified.
Thank you very much. All right, another question. Any potential for underground parking or too expensive, not practical?
Hey, Rob, before we move on to parking, I'm going to ask Adrian to maybe talk a little bit about just the board process in determining boundary scopes, because I think the question was more aligned with, does this have the implication of changing elementary school boundaries? And I think it's important for Adrian to describe the board process for identifying or moving forward with a boundary study.
Sure. So what typically happens is the superintendent will make a recommendation on an anticipated scope of a boundary study. And once that scope is recommended, then the board has an opportunity to support that, approve that scope, or change that scope. And that scope could include, high school. If in this case, of course, it's a high school. So of course it would include high schools and middle school, and it could include middle schools. Typically, we use the elementary school service areas to then create options for the boundary study. But it is possible, based upon what the board ultimately approves, they could decide to look at elementary school service areas as well. Again, we won't know that until that scope is approved by the board. DJ did say sort of at the beginning of the meeting that we typically do boundary studies 12 to 18 months before a school opens. In this case, I anticipate it probably being 2 years before, or certainly close to 2 years, just because of the amount of schools that we are talking about and the process and how long it will actually take. But again, it is possible we look at middle schools, changes in middle school assignments, certainly, of course, changes in high school assignments, and it's possible elementary school as well.
Adrian, thank you. Is there anything you want to add, Seth? Good.
I just want to make sure that was explained, so thank you.
Thank you. So here's a question. Is there any potential for underground parking or too expensive, not practical? Seth, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, while we are continuing to explore structured parking, including underground parking, we certainly will weigh the pros and cons of, is it cost effective? Does it solve the issues that we're trying to solve? I do think, again, as Dirk mentioned earlier, we're in a pretty good location from the perspective of possibly partnering with neighboring businesses, not necessarily neighboring residents, but neighboring businesses for some of those big events like football games and back to school night type of events, to see if we can take advantage of that. But I think we will absolutely start to look at the pros and cons of structured parking. We heard that there is grade changes on the site, so if we can possibly take advantage of that and achieve some savings of space by utilizing that, then certainly we will explore that. And that is one of those areas that, as we continue the design concepts and as the architects come back with a variety of approaches, we can explore, what that would mean. One thing I would say is structured parking is expensive. It is absolutely much more expensive than surface parking. So, in our balanced approach of a budget, we absolutely want to make sure the money is applied to the program, to the academic experience. So if it's cost effective or it does make sense to do structured parking, we will absolutely pursue it. But I would say that we do want to focus the funding that we do receive for this project, starting with the academic side, and then obviously working out from there.
Thank you, Seth. I also want to say that we do encounter safety and security issues around the underground parking. So something else we have to consider when we're designing that feature. As a Crown resident, I would prefer the physical school to be furthest from the community as possible. Agree about the service road that adds traffic to the community, and we do not want trucks going through when there are other better access points. All right, thank you for your comment. Net zero alignment for a building coming online in a few years will be critical as expectations around net zero will escalate dramatically in the next couple of years. Better to seriously consider it today than having to retrofit a new building later. And we are looking at all the latest requirements for the county, and we are considering those options, as Seth said earlier. So we will, as we get through this design and present additionally as we get past this initial phase, we'll have continue to have those conversations. Thank you for the comment. There was a comment about the outreach to the cluster PTAs, and I will reach out to all the schools that we sent the information to, so they can provide that information to all the PTAs. We sent out information to 44 different schools, so I will reach back out to them here the next couple of days. But we do definitely want the PTA families involved in this process. Thank you. All right, I don't see anything else at this time. We went through everything. Is there anything else, Seth or Dirk?
Can you just remind everyone, is there an opportunity to ask questions following this presentation? Do we have something set up, Rob or Dirk, that folks can share the recording, and then also, have folks that could not attend, possibly add their comments, questions, concerns?
We will be posting this onto our website. So all this information will be there, and I think Dirk's Jasmine's going back to that link, and that's available. If you just go to the at this website, and you just type in current CIP projects, or copy this link here, and it'll take you right there, and you'll see all the latest work sessions, the upcoming work session, which is November 11th, and all the questions. Where you can watch the recording, and any questions we do not answer, we will provide that information. Now, I don't, besides contacting me directly through my email address, which is also on that website. Dirk, I don't think we have another way of getting the questions to them or to me. So unless you have a way of doing that.
None that I know of, Rob. I was going to say that as the point of contact, you might just start getting a lot of emails.
Yeah.
I do very much like the idea of encouraging the participants to look at the slide deck and to think further about the project, and to send their questions in advance of our next meeting. So if there are questions, Rob, I hate to do it to you, but I would encourage them to get their questions to you, and then we can meet together on a proper response, and then post those responses very promptly afterward.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. There's somebody mentioned that they're one of the high school clusters mentioned, but never received the mailer. I just want to mention that the mailers go out to the surrounding community. So all of Crown community got the mailer. The Connect Ed goes out from all of the clusters. So please reach out to the websites with your school and look for the link to that. And I will reinstate that to all the high schools and the middle and elementary schools that we sent the mailer to, the flyer to, that they can post that on their website. So it'll have the link, and you can go directly to our website from there. All right. I don't have anything else. Seth, do you have anything?
I would just add that, it is certainly something we take to heart to get feedback. So for those that have said that they have not received it through their school avenues or through Connect Eds, we will follow up and we will most likely transition to working with the central office to broadcast much broadly throughout all communities versus just focused communities. So we do take that to heart. So for the next one, we hope to just send out much broader Connect Eds to families. And for those that are on now, if they've received the feedback or if they've received those Connect Eds, please acknowledge it so that we know it's happening. And that way we can get as much feedback as possible. But no, I would just say thank you everyone that did participate tonight. Feedback is very valuable, and look forward to continuing to work with you all on the upcoming meetings.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thanks as well. Thank you, everyone.
We're going to go ahead and end the meeting, and just once again, thank you everybody for their questions and comments.
Okay. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.